What are the facts about Jesus' death? Tacitus, most important Roman historian of his time, says clearly, quote, Christus, the founder of the name, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius by sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate. Period. Josephus, we're not even sure if this is authentic, but even if it is, Josephus says, when Pilate, upon hearing Jesus accused by men of the highest standing amongst us, the Jewish high priest, who was an agent of Rome, he was essentially the Roman enforcer. The rabbis, the Pharisees, hated the high priests, and as soon as the Roman war broke out in 66, they got rid of the Roman high priest, the Jewish high priest who was appointed by Rome. But he says clearly, Pilate had him condemned to be crucified, period. This was par for the course. Jesus wasn't the only one. They put to death every would-be Messiah. Judah of Galilee was put to death by the Romans in 6 CE. Theodos was put to death in 44 CE. There was no trial. They cut his head off. And they threw it into the Jordan River, which he tried to part. Benjamin the Egyptian was put to death in 60 CE. Pontius Pilate, according to every modern and ancient historian, was the cruelest proconsul the Romans ever put into Judea. Mel Gibson's film, based on Matthew 27, is absolutely scandalous. It is defamatory. The idea that Pontius Pilate, a man described by King Agrippa as, quote, and this is in a letter to the Emperor Caligula, a man who harbors acts of violence, plunderings, abuses, provocations, corruption, continual murders of persons untried, uncondemned, never-ending, endless, unbelievable cruelties, gratuitous and most grievous inhumanity, end quote. Philo, one of the most important figures of the entire ancient world, speaking about Pilate. Pilate was, quote, an unbending and recklessly hard character, famous for corruptibility, violence, robberies, ill treatment of the people, grievances, continued execution without any form of trial, endless and intolerable cruelties. Does this sound like a man whom, according to Newsweek, because I have not seen the film, Mel hasn't invited the rabbis to see it. There's been a screening at like every church in America, but not one in a synagogue. I mean, why should he show it to the Jews? I mean, just because this has been the most heinous allegation that has slaughtered them through the ages. I mean, who's asking for just a drop of sensitivity in the third Christian millennium in America? By the way, I don't expect a lot from Mel. He said today to an Australian newspaper that his wife is going to hell. Do you know that? He said that she's very loving, she's a better person than him, but because she's a Protestant, she is going to hell. Which means that my dear friend Mike Brown, and we really are becoming closer as time goes on, believe it or not, and he very lovingly told me in our last debate that although he really cares for me, you know, I am going to hell because I don't believe in Jesus. Okay, I mean, you know, I'll find out when I get there, and I grew up in Miami, and I'm used to heat, and maybe this is going to, you know, maybe this will really be hot, But according to Mel Gibson, my dear friend Mike Brown, along with Mel Gibson's wife, is going straight to hell. What happened to the good old days when he used to run around with that black actor, Danny Glover? It warmed all our hearts, a black man and a white man walking around shooting people together. You remember that? The good old days? Before he became just a rancid, anti-Semitic bigot? If you don't believe me about the nature of Pontius Pilate, read Luke in the New Testament, chapter 13, verse 1, where it is related how Pilate murdered and massacred huge groups of Galileans who were worshiping in the temple. And of course, Jesus was a Galilean. Read Josephus, who says that Pilate was so cruel that he had to be recalled by Rome in the year 36 because a Samaritan prophet had gained a large following and brought them up to a holy mountain, and Pilate slaughtered all 4,000 of them. Could you imagine how cruel you have to be for the Romans to consider you cruel? But this is the man who Newsweek tells me Mel portrays as contemplative, meditative. His wife has dreams about Jesus. She says he's a holy man. I mean, this man was Saddam Hussein. He was the Saddam Hussein of the ancient world. What mercy? What are we talking about here? Where's the history? As far as this belief that the Jews wanted to kill Christ, give me a break. The New Testament says clearly that the Jews several times saved the life of Jesus. Luke chapter 13, verse 31. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here. Herod wants to kill you." And you know why the Jews would save Jesus? Because he wasn't a bad man. Because he was a devout Jew. because all he wanted to do was reinforce Jewish observance of the Torah, as he says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 18, that anyone who doesn't keep the Torah will be the least in the kingdom of heaven. All Jesus wanted was to throw off the Roman oppression of his beloved people. So he declared himself the Messiah, which there's no problem declaring yourself the Messiah. My mother's convinced it's me. And all you have to do is fulfill the messianic prophecies. He tried. I think it's time for us Jews to take back Jesus from the anti-Semitic Jesus that he was been made into by our Christian brethren. What a tragedy. He was one of ours. We should take him back. He should be seen for what he was, a learned rabbi who so loved Jewish people and so hated their oppression that he was prepared to fight the Romans. And he was almost, there's even a few verses in the New Testament that he asked his disciples to get swords. He was even prepared for a military conflict in order to throw off their oppression. And he was killed. He was a martyr for his cause. Let's go further. Gamliel was the leader of the whole Pharisaic party. He's considered one of the greatest rabbis of all time. When the apostle Peter was being tried and they wanted to put him to death, it was Gamliel who saved his life in Acts chapter 5, verse 16, 17, and 18. In Acts 5:33, in Acts 5:33, it was Gamliel who saves Peter. And later, it's the Pharisees who even saved Paul, even though Paul spews such venom at the Pharisees constantly. According to Acts 23, verses 6 through 9, quote, "Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up, and they said, 'We find nothing wrong in this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him?'" Pharisees saved Jesus' life. Gamliel saves Peter's life. The Pharisees save Paul's life. Doesn't it sound to you like they had no real problem with the Christian sect and it was really the Romans? Doesn't it make sense to say that since all these Gospels are written after the year 66, when the terrible war between the Jews and the Romans broke out, and some of them were even written after 100 CE, doesn't it make sense to say that the Christians decided to re-edit all of their Holy Scripture to ensure that the Romans would be exonerated and that the Jews would be implicated in the death of Jesus? I mean, doesn't it make perfect sense to say, even if the Romans, let alone trying to court Roman power, even if the Christians wanted to proselytize, you knock on a Christian's door, this isn't my argument, I saw it on the internet, you knock on a Christian's door and you say, "Hey, I'm a Christian." I'm sorry, you knock on a Roman's door, "I'm a Christian. We have this church at the edge of Rome by the catacombs. Come for Sunday services." And the Roman says, "But what is Christianity?" And he says, "Oh, it's named after a man who was put to death as a common criminal by one of your governors." Could you see the Roman saying, "Yeah, can I bring the kids?" I mean, obviously the Roman would just slam the door in his face. Therefore, it had to say something different. What is Christianity? Simple. This was a great rabbi who really was God, but the Jews, who all of us hate, are so devilish, so demonic, they couldn't tolerate him, so they put him to death. Don't you see the rabbis had no problem with Jesus? What are the main things that the New Testament says that the rabbis, their arguments against Jesus? They said that he healed on Shabbos. Every Orthodox doctor on earth heals on Shabbos. If a rabbi doesn't tell someone to be healed on Shabbos when their life is threatened, they would probably be thrown out of their synagogue and they would never get a job again. Number two, they said that Jesus predicted the end of the temple. Everyone knew the second temple wasn't going to stand forever. It was missing 10 of the most important ingredients of the first temple. The Pharisees hated those who controlled the temple. They were the Sadducees party who were Roman agents. As far as Jesus saying, "You have heard on the Sermon on the Mount that eye for an eye, but I'm here to tell you differently," Jesus was a Pharisee. Of course, it doesn't mean an eye for an eye. He studied what later was written down as the Talmud. We have never understood that verse literally. He was a Pharisaic rabbi in every respect. And that's why when his students pick ears of corn, he defends himself by saying David did the same thing when David's life was threatened when he was being chased by Saul. It was a life-threatening situation.